We are closing in on the 2012 elections, and to talk a little bit about how the campaign season has been going thus far, we have Dr. Larry Jacobs from the Humphrey Institute. Thanks so much for joining us.
Great to be with you.
Dr. Jacobs, on October 13th, you stated to the St. Paul Pioneer Press that the Minnesota state legislative races are the most consequential uncovered political event in the state this year. What's at stake for voters?
Pretty much everything. We've got some very big decisions to be made about the budget. We're going to have, again, by all projections, some kind of deficit, and so there are going to have to be decisions made on spending. In addition, we've got the governor working pretty hard over the last year to come up with a major reform of taxes. Then you've got November 16th. The governor's got to send word to Washington about our intention to participate in health reform. So there are a lot of big issues here, and the legislature, being Republican, will probably have more disagreement, maybe even walk up to the edge of a government shutdown. But if it's Democratic, I think we're going to see probably one of the big periods of government activism.
Simply, in your opinion, is the economy the only issue that's going to have the greatest impact on this particular election?
The economy is obviously the number 1, 2, and 3 issue for voters. But I also think in Minnesota, party identification, we've become more polarized. If you're a Democrat or you're a Republican, most of the time, more than 9 out of 10 times, it's going to drive who you vote for. And so those factors are going to come together. In certain parts of the states, other issues are important. Agriculture in the South, maybe in the Collin-Peterson district on the western edge as well. Up north, you've got issues regarding mining and also environmental issues. But I'd say overwhelmingly that the economy is the top issue.
What do you think? You mentioned agriculture and mining, but do you think there might be some other issues that could play into this as well, such as, education reform and as you mentioned, healthcare?
Education reform just doesn't seem to be percolating the way it has in the past. It's because I think the economy is just cast a kind of a dominant gloss on everything. With mining and agriculture, those are obviously economic issues, and those are the issues that are important both up north and the south and the west for folks and their jobs.
When we look down at the last couple of years, statewide anyway, what do you think voters are going to remember more? Do you think they're going to remember the government shutdown, or do you think the message of balancing the budget without raising taxes will resonate with voters?
Government shutdown is going to always be there, but it is striking when you look at the record how much has been done. Certainly on health reform, it looks to me like Governor Dayton is going to be pushing that forward. Governor Pawlenty, heavily criticized by Democrats for some of his budgets, but we did see a slowdown in government spending, and that may also be something, particularly on the conservative Republican side, they look to and say, hey, we could do it.
The impact on redistricting this election, let's talk a little bit about that. Several sources, including MinPost, believe that the new district maps could be favorable to the Senate DFL. Do you agree with that?
Yes. The Republicans should have been advantaged by redistricting. When you look around at the suburbs where there were so-called excess voters, there was every reason to expect those voters to help Republicans. The Bachman Congressional District, the Paulson District, even the Klein District, these were all the so-called excess voters were. And the courts really adopted a status quo, let's not do too much change, and they kind of, I would say, evenly distributed those votes in a way that probably hurt the Republicans' chances. They should have gotten a bang, they didn't.
So how do you think this will, you're saying it's going to hurt their chances. Do you think it could hurt it to the point of losing control of the House and Senate?
I think that's a real possibility. It's always difficult to predict, and I'm not.
Right.
But here would be the number 1 issue, I think, facing the legislative races: turnout. The Republicans are facing a kind of a triple tag team. They don't have the presidential candidate in the Republican Party investing in Minnesota. Mitt Romney does not even have a campaign office, whereas the Obama side has been up and running for over a year. That's a lot of resources, a lot of names that are being collected. The U.S. Senate race, the Republican candidate is just not running the kind of competent, strong, statewide campaign that we have seen in the past from Republicans, whereas the incumbent, Amy Klobuchar, is also running quite a good campaign, sometimes teaming up with Obama in his campaign, but often on her own. And then you've got the two parties. The Republican Party is in real financial and organizational trouble at this point. The Democratic Party, not in great shape, but certainly in better shape. So you look at all that, and there's going to be a lot of muscle on the Democratic side to turn out the vote, whereas there may be some discouragement among Republican voters who don't see a reason to vote in races that are not competitive, and there won't be that organizational triple teaming to turn them out to vote.
To that point, though, Dr. Jacobs, there's a lot of money and a lot of media being spent on the constitutional amendments, particularly the same-sex marriage ban, for lack of a better phrase for it, the definition of marriage, I should say. Do you think that this could drive voter turnout and kind of balance what you had just said?
Absolutely. The constitutional amendments may well drive turnout, though it's unclear which way. You remember in 2010, the big story there where Democrats didn't turn out because they were just not that excited about the Obama administration. That has continued to be an issue. It's not as big an issue in a presidential election year where people are more enthusiastic and tied in, but it remains an issue, particularly among younger voters. And the kind of battle over how to define marriage really registers with the younger voter set. It may help to drive turnout among younger folks, counteracting any drive by conservatives to get out their support.
And so do you think these ballot initiatives help or hurt any party's effort to win legislative control?
I think it probably helps both parties a bit, but I think the bigger factor here is going to be so much more organizational effort on the side of Democrats to get out the vote. It does not take a whole lot of impact. This is not, a monumental change. We're talking half a percentage point could make the difference. You look back at 2010, the House races were decided by less than 700 votes in total. The Senate side, just a bit more than 2,000. Those are squeakers, and a whole lot of those squeaker races were won by Republicans. If there's just a downtick of 20, 30,000 voters distributed strategically, that could make the difference in Republicans hanging on to both or one chamber or losing them.
My last question for you, Dr. Jacobs. A few months ago when you were on the show, we spoke a little bit about the campaign season, and you stated at that time that you did not think this would be a wave election. How do you feel about it now?
I still don't see wave conditions. Obviously President Obama and Governor Romney are neck and neck. It doesn't seem to be any one candidate breaking. You look around the country, you see the Senate, congressional races looking more status quo-ish than we might have expected. I think there's a decent chance we're going to end up in Washington and perhaps even in Minnesota with the same balance of power, which is divided government. One party controlling the executive branch and another party controlling at least one of the chambers on the legislative side.
Okay, we would love to talk with you in a few weeks after the elections and kind of gauge your opinions on those. So thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Good to be with you.